Hey guys, welcome back. We're going to talk about all of my favorite classic books. Now, please wish me luck. This is the third attempt at filming this. For whatever reason, the program I keep trying to film this on does not like my video, and it messes up the sound or it's lagging, and it's incredibly frustrating. So we're going to take this slow and do little bits at a time. We're going to make sure the sound quality is good and get through this video, because this is an incredibly important video to the series that I have been working on, where I'm talking about all of my favorite books in specific genres. Now, I must warn you that especially when it comes to classics, I feel like it will be very similar to most other people's favorite classic book lists. As a whole, I don't feel like I've read that many classics in my lifetime, but I do hope to change that and continue growing the different classic literature that I read. Especially come next year, I have quite a few plans. I hope that in the future I will be able to expand on this list. But for now, I did decide to actually organize this list by maybe more modern classics and then go backwards in time. The first book is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This was first published in 1962. This book follows the Blackwood family as they are shunned from society. One evening at dinner, a terrible accident happens, and they become even more isolated and reclusive. Mary Catherine leaves sometimes, but they whisper about her and call her names. The townspeople think that they are dangerous, murderous, but are the rumors true? The things that I love about this story are that it's gothic horror. I think that I just love that genre to begin with. Gothic, the Blackwoods are a very reclusive family. They're a little quirky. They have lots of secrets. The setting takes place in a house, which also, if you say Gothic, it usually means that there is a house that is kind of the central location. But even in literature that's not necessarily Gothic literature, I do just like the concept of when it takes place in a house, or like when a house is a big theme in the story. And also the inclusion of poison. I know there's other things that I like in this story, and for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time articulating that, but this just as a whole is just so good. I have read this now 3 times on audiobook, but I actually recently acquired this past year, and I'm just so happy to finally have a physical copy, so I do plan on giving it another reread, and just, I think, connecting to it a little bit more. I'll be able to understand some more of the themes, I think, when I can connect to it on, with doing a closer read of it. And it's a lot easier when you have a physical copy and to be able to annotate and stuff like that. So the next one is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This was published in 1960. This takes place in a small Alabama town called Macon. And one day I will have to drive there and visit it. Actually, when we were moving from Florida, I saw signs from the highway that could take you there. But we were moving and we weren't like on a joyride or anything like that. Like, we needed to make it here in time. So, but one day I think that might be kind of interesting to go out there. I don't know if there's anything there, but it's kind of cool that I'm close enough. Sorry, now my son is watching TV in the front living room. So if you hear the noise, I really apologize. There can be nothing done for it. About this quiet black man who is blamed for the rape of a white woman. Atticus Finch is an attorney and is tasked with representing him in court, and the town is in a complete uproar. This is the South in 1933, and the public is furious with the white attorney for taking this case and defending Arthur Radley, or better known as Boo Radley. And the way that they treat him and his family is completely horrible. This does follow a bit of a mystery, because as he is representing Boo Radley, everyone has already blamed him. He has a guilty verdict over his head. Atticus is representing him, and they are kind of going through this mystery and investigation of figuring out what actually happened before they condemn him, before he sees his day in court. He is in an investigation. And what comes of the actual case is absolutely insane. Boo Radley is this quiet, very respectful man who minds his own business and just tries to get through life without causing trouble. And then he finds himself in the middle of this situation this story is about how he gets there. The things that I love in this story are the characters, Atticus and his daughter Scout. Scout is actually the narrator explaining this event through her perspective. Again, this concept of having a different narrator or child as a narrator has come up in a few other books that I enjoy. Another aspect I really love is the law. I have studied and earned my associates for paralegal, and I just love how Atticus, the attorney, upholds the justice system and every man's right to have their day in court. He defends Boo Radley and gives him a fair trial that no other attorney would touch. And I just think whether or not a person is guilty or not, they should absolutely have representation. Especially for Atticus Finch, because the entire town, his friends, his neighbors, were all coming for him, and he had to suffer through a lot of heat, harassment from everyone who was mad at him. I also really love the twist in the story. Maybe it was obvious or had become clear early on, but I don't really care. And I absolutely love how the book got its title, what To Kill a Mockingbird means. I feel like there's something else in the story I just really, really enjoyed. I guess that's it. Now, I have 2 books by the same author. They are actually broken up because of the way I decided to organize this. But that is John Steinbeck. So I have now read 3 of his books. And that is The Pearl of Mice and Men, and most recently, but is not on this list, is Travels with Charlie. But because of the fact that I have 2 of his books on this list, I'm just going to go ahead and say John Steinbeck is a favorite author as a whole, and that is because of these 2 books. The first one is The Pearl. This was published in 1957. One second. Okay, I had to take a little break. Apparently, I have figured out why my computer has been messing up. It's getting too warm. Of course, it would be something that simple. Anyways, all right, let's continue. The Pearl by John Steinbeck. This book was published in 1957. This follows Kino, who is a diver. He is very poor, and just like his father and his grandfather, he dives for pearls. One day, he finds a huge pearl, and he dreams of selling it and becoming rich. As word spreads, he finds himself very popular, and everyone wants to look at this pearl. He begins making deals for after he sells this, no doubt, very valuable pearl. He will have all of this money. So this book is incredibly small, but it packs a punch as Kino learns about what makes a man rich, value, and not to sell your chickens before they hatch, so to speak. I absolutely love the themes of wealth and greed. In some ways, this is incredibly different from Dark Academia, which also follows a lot of those themes, but more from the other side of the discussion, from the rich elitists. This is obviously from the opposite side, but in some ways, it's very much the same. Does money equate to a better life? What is wealth? What does it bring? Does it change you? How do people treat you differently? And I just love those discussions. And I feel like while it seems kind of niche, there's just so many different ways. There's so many different variables that can go into it. And I just love all different sides of the conversation and themes. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This was published in... Sorry, I keep saying that weird. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. This was published in 1953. This follows a fireman in the future where risk of fires is eliminated. Instead, they investigate and find books and burn books. Our main character, Guy Montag, and his wife are upstanding citizens. Guy is a proud fireman until he meets a girl named Clarice, a young woman who sees the world in a way that he finds incredibly fascinating. She enjoys a really quiet afternoon to sit and think. She notices the small details of the world around her, and he begins to question his own life. One day, he comes across a book and thinks. He gets curious. What's inside? His life will never be the same again. The things that I loved about this book is... so first of all, So I actually read this book many, many years ago. I want to say it was maybe middle school age when I first read this book. And I just have always held it as an all-time favorite book for so long. But then I realized this last few years that, like, it's been so long I can't really remember the details. I just know I love it. So this past year I actually did a reread of it, and I love it even more now because I definitely feel that I could see it in a different way, because a big huge portion of this about Guy's character and to explain the world is kind of through him and his wife's relationship, which they are like the worst couple ever. They're like roommates. And I think that it says something about that's probably the type of dynamic and relationship you can expect in this world without books, a world without love and creativity and everything else. So yeah. So now that I've read it as an adult, as a married woman, like looking at their relationship now, I definitely didn't even pick up on it or remember it at all as a kid, but now I can connect to it, so it definitely made it a different reading experience, and I still love this book. The other things that I loved about this is it is a book about books. It is a dystopian world. The dynamic between Guy and his wife, and then also the dynamic between Clarice and Guy, and like how that really changed things, how he is just like, what is this thing you talk about just thinking? Just being free with your thoughts? What are you talking about? He doesn't understand that concept, and it's hilarious to see that change, I love Clarice and just kind of what she means as far as like being able to just appreciate the small things, the little things, nature, that's something that I definitely like never want to lose. And I also really loved the ending and how this group has preserved books in their way. And that was really cool. I actually think it kind of brings us all the way back to the beginning of storytelling, which is really cool. The next one is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This was published in 1937. This one's also on the list because I really honestly I didn't want to put two by the same author but at the same time I couldn't decide which one was better, The Pearl or this one, because I think this one will always hold a place in my heart too, because I read this is my first Steinbeck, and I read this back in high school, and I hated it. I hated it with a fiery passion. And then I read The Pearl, and I was like, maybe I should just give it a try again. So then when I reread it, it's become a favorite of mine. I think there's a lot of factors into that. I think because of that change, that drastic change in my opinion. I think because the book itself, the story itself is really good. The ending breaks you, but it makes you think so much about what would you have done in that situation? What is the right thing? Is there, you can't really answer that question, Also, my husband really likes this book, so it was really cool to have another book that, to share that with him, to read books that he really likes, to be able to share that with him. That also makes it incredibly special. Of Mice and Men is about George and Lenny who travel from farm to farm for work. The book starts with them as they are about to start a new job. We learn eventually why they had to leave the last farm. George is an average guy, maybe a little short for a man, kind of small. And Lenny is this really big, strong guy, but he's also simple-minded, as they describe it in the book. Today, you may say that he has autism or maybe even Down syndrome. I don't really know, but he does need constant supervision. He does have sensory issues, and he can't remember a lot of things for very long. George looks out for him, even though they're not related, and he also sacrifices a lot for him too. It's a really difficult life in a tough world where people are not empathetic to things like we are today. On this farm, we learn about the other farmhands and harvesters. We get to know them, the men that they bunk with and everything. But there's the owner's new wife who hangs around a little too much when she's bored. This does not bode well for George and Lenny, and it puts them in an impossible predicament, which leads to the ending, which you will never forget. It will break you. That's all I can say about this. It is a very difficult one, warning you, but it's also incredibly good and impactful. It's incredibly good and impactful. This one's kind of weird because with the other ones, I have like specific symbols and themes that I've picked out that I really like. But this, I don't really know what exactly to pick out that I liked about it. I guess it's just the story of their time at this farm. I like that there's just these two guys going to work, I guess. I kind of like that. Maybe now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more in this moment, maybe it's a little refreshing where you're just reading about two average guys going to work. The kinds of books that I'm always reading, they're fantasy. So there's like royals, or they never really talk about just their average days going to work. Actually, I remember that being something that I really enjoyed about Crescent City, because they talk about Bryce Quinlan, like her job and going to work and stuff like that at a library. And I think that it makes sense for our characters to like have to work to provide for themselves. Maybe that's my thing. I like when our characters actually go to work like everybody else. But yeah, other than that, it's just an incredible book. All right, the next book is a book that I don't physically own, and that is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I may have to change that someday if I find a good copy. And I have to say, actually, the time that I read this, it was my first like gothic novel, still kind of maybe new to the genre or whatever. I didn't really identify this attribute of this book at the time, but through conversations and stuff like that, when I hear people talk about this book, I'm like, no kidding. So this actually is told by an unnamed narrator who marries the older, handsome widower, Maxim de Winter. And when she moves into their giant estate mansion, Rebecca, the late wife, seems like she's everywhere. Rebecca just seems to haunt her, and our narrator struggles to live up to the bar that Rebecca set of what a perfect wife ought to be. And with absolute no help from Miss Danvers, who is like, I don't know what you would call her title. I think she's more than a maid. She's like the house manager-esque, maybe like a personal assistant to the lady of the house. She runs like the kitchen staff and all of that kind of thing to get, it's like a pyramid, So the things that I loved about this book. So it's a gothic novel, which is something now that I learned that a lot of these books that I'm really enjoying are from the gothic genre. That's just a genre that I really like. The house, the atmosphere of this book is just like this foreboding feeling of doom. Domestic troubles and secrets. Mr. De Winter's relationship with Rebecca, what kind of person Rebecca was, Mrs. Danvers, like they all have like their secrets. And yeah. The setting of a house, again, the house is a huge theme, as this new young bride has no chance of really making it her home when Rebecca is everywhere. And I just think that's such an interesting concept. Like, if you move into a house, you get married, you moved into the house, you change things, you make it yours, you pick out the linens that you want, you serve dinner when you want dinner. And there is a specific character in this story that's really kind of blocking that progression in her storyline. And instead of making this her home, she's trying to live in Rebecca's home, if that makes sense. And so like the roles are just swapped. So it's from the furnishings, the linens, the spaces, the rooms, the people, and even the customs and habits of the home. All of those things, it's like, it's chilling even just talking about it. It's so good. And the ending is twisted. It's messed up. It made me so angry. I wanted to throw the book and I wanted to choke out the specific character so badly. Such a good book. I need to reread this. Just talking about it makes me want to reread it again. The next one is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Marie Rilke. I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly. This was published in 1929. Rilke is a German poet, and I have read a few of his poems, and I have a few of his collections. He actually ends up receiving a letter from an aspiring poet, and this book is a collection of their letters back and forth. They talk a lot about poetry, of course. They talk about a lot of other topics, such as life and art, being a creator, getting stuck in your creative process, being your true self, the struggles of how to find that deep place within where art lives, where the most productive and the most authentic self in that creative space, if that makes sense. Rilke also talks a lot about how he lives for that lonely isolation that most people don't like to feel uncomfortable in that. Most people feel uncomfortable in that space, and he lives for it because that's where his creative space is mentally. Most people try to fix and fill that loneliness, but Rilke writes best in that space. And I just find that so interesting, and he's so completely correct. And I also, I definitely know exactly what he's talking about. If you've ever been a creative person, a writer or whatever, you know what I'm talking about. So incredible. The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. Again, sorry for the pronunciation. French eludes me. This was published in 1910. This is about an opera house and the female lead who is haunted by a phantom. One day a man comes to the opera who's getting really friendly with her, and the phantom becomes jealous. He is actually a man who hides and wears a mask to hide his deformed face. One day he kidnaps the girl and all hell breaks loose. And forgive me for not having all of their names. It actually has been quite a while since I have read this. And also, while I love and adore the story so much, and I've seen the movie, and my husband actually has gone to see the play, but I haven't seen the play before. One of these days, I really want to see, maybe he and I will be able to go see the play together. But I do have to admit, though, my when I read this book, I felt like there were definitely some parts of the reading experience I was stumbling over. And so I felt like I was missing some things, like maybe some of the more nuanced stuff. Like I understood the greater concept of the plot, the characters, roles, and all that stuff. But there were just other little nuanced things. Like I could tell some of the humorous things. I could tell they were funny, but I don't think I fully got the whole impact of the joke, if you know what I'm saying. Usually I'm not too particular about the narrator style. I feel like because I had gone into this with specific expectations of what the story was supposed to be about, and so I was taken a little bit by surprise that it's actually told through someone who's a little bit more distant from the story. It's told through the managers who run the opera house watching everything. I think that the perspective of the storytelling kind of threw me a little bit. Anyways, incredible. The things that I loved about this is that it takes place in the opera house, which, again, just like the setting of a house, it is just a huge portion. You know, it's like it is the place, it is the home to the phantom and the singer and to all of these characters. It is central, and this house, this venue, has secret hideaways and things. It is a tragic love story. The phantom desires a woman that he cannot have, and I'm a complete and utter sucker for forbidden love stories. I just love the angst and the jealousy that comes with those sorts of stories. The humor, and there was a lot of funny laugh out loud moments. The next one is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This was published in 1897. This is actually told through Jonathan Harkness's journal entries and letters. Jonathan Harkness is a journalist, and he visits Dracula at his home, and he's writing a piece about him. Well, the tables turn when Dracula gets information from him about the outside world. So the first half of the book is all at Dracula's castle and these conversations that he's having with Dracula and the goings on at his house and his experience, the different weird hours, and it just increasingly gets worse until all of a sudden his letters stop. And then the second portion, it's almost like we start again and we switch gears. We are following new characters, one of which is Jonathan's fiancée, Lucy. And I believe it was Lucy, who comes down with an illness that the people looking after her grow more and more concerned. And so we slowly watch that progress. Why isn't she getting better? The other women in her life and the conversations going around, and then enter Van Helsing. And it's definitely, I can see that this book is not everyone's cup of tea, but it was probably one of my first classics. It's Dracula. It's I love vampire stuff. So it was just a monumental feat, a monumental thing for me to read. One of the beginning. I know it's not the first vampire book that's available, but it's an iconic story of vampires. This was also the first book that I ever annotated. And the highlighter looks really orange, but I thought it was red, and I tried to highlight and underline any mentions of Dracula with red. That was just a really fun experience to also just really connect to the book and really pick it apart. And I took a long time to read this book. I remember it taking me like months. And obviously I was reading other things while I was reading it too, but I just didn't want to rush the process, and I had a lot of fun annotating it. Like this has so many notes in it. I love it. I might have to do a reread of this and look at all my notes again. But that is Dracula. Oh, the things that I love. Vampires. I know it's not the first, but surely it's one of the most famous vampire stories. I thought it was really interesting letter format. However, other than this one, there are some other books I've read where I don't necessarily know if I like the entire narrative through letter format, but I do like that it offers a very interesting limited perspective, which I do enjoy that. So there's that. The next one is another book that I don't actually have a physical copy of, and that is The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And this was published in 1892. I did actually end up listening to this on audiobook, and I just remember having just the most creeped out physical feelings while reading this book. Like I felt scared, which is kind of weird considering, and it's an incredibly short little book. And I want to say, okay, so this follows a new mom who's most likely suffering from postpartum, as we would all consider it nowadays. Back then, they just felt that this woman was being unreasonable, that she had hysteria and a bit of ennui. The solution was to lock her away in a room by herself until she got over it. It was to tell her to shut up so that nobody would see and that they wouldn't have to deal with her. Naturally, anyone isolated like that would go completely insane. And this could actually potentially go on maybe nonfiction, because I believe it was actually inspired by the author's story, similar story that the author herself went through. But yeah, so it's called The Yellow Wallpaper because while she is isolated in this room, the only thing to stare at was this yellow wallpaper that had paisley patterns on it. Is just, there's nothing to occupy her mind. There is nothing to do. And so she just starts losing herself in this wallpaper, and then the wallpaper starts to seem to come alive almost. And yeah, it's really good. The next one is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. This was published in 1890. Highly popular for very good reason. Dorian is a sweet, hopeful, chipper young man who sits to have his portrait painted. The painter's old friend Henry comes by, and he is just absolutely taken with Dorian. They all start chatting it up and begin to discuss youth and beauty. And Henry and Dorian go on to be friends for many years. However, as the years go by, Dorian doesn't seem to be aging at all. So Henry and Dorian become really good lifelong years. They become really good friends. They like to party a lot, partake in all kinds of debauchery and sinful activities. But as the years go by, Dorian doesn't seem to be aging. He just stays just as young and youthful 10 years on as he was. And some people are kind of starting to notice. When Dorian takes a closer look at his portrait, he notices a flaw. And he becomes just obsessed with this flaw. And then more partying, more sinful behavior, and as more and more time goes on, his portrait gets more distorted. I guess he puts the two and two together, that he will stay young and youthful no matter what he does in his life, and his portrait will only be the one to reflect the Mars of his soul, essentially. So yeah. So he just becomes obsessed with these flaws that are being reflected in his portrait. And although he never changes, his portrait changes and grows more and more grotesque. So he resolves to hide it away so that no one can see it. So yeah, you go on, and it just the concepts of youth and beauty and how we act, I guess, his behavior. It's such an amazing book. It's so crazy. It's so twisted. And Yeah. I feel that I read this at the right time of my life because I think I had just passed over the age of 30, and it was kind of a difficult, or maybe it was closer to like 35. I don't know. I was probably like mid 30s. Okay, I know I'm talking like I'm so old, and I know you're looking at me being like, you're not that old, but I just turned 39. So yeah, it was a few years ago, and I was definitely kind of reflecting on I kid you not, once I hit 30, it seemed like all these other things about my body really started to affect me mentally, emotionally, because these were things I've never had to worry about before in my life. And now my body is changing and it's out of my control. And I'm sitting there being like, oh my gosh, the next stage is 40. And like, that seems so scary and old. I don't know. So I read this at the right time. I needed to read this book, and it's the talk about youth and beauty. And the way it is in here is you realize like it isn't everything. It's the life that you lead. It's your happiness. It's the people in your life and that truly matter. You can be blessed with the best looks ever, but that doesn't mean anything essentially. And yeah, I don't know. It was really, really good. The next one is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was published in 1886. Another Victorian horror told from a detective who I want to say happens to know who Dr. Jekyll was. So this is told from the detective's perspective, he's an attorney. I'm sorry. This is told from an attorney's perspective, and knows Dr. Jekyll. Yes, that's right. He works for Dr. Jekyll, and he noticed that there was some really strange wording on his will. And so he was trying to track him down to kind of clarify it, and he starts to see some strange things. And then in the city itself, there are some pretty gruesome crimes going on. And why am I struggling to explain this book? So while he's trying to track down Dr. Jekyll, he sees this other character who kind of looks like Dr. Jekyll, but he's not acting like him. And he's noticing some like different behavior. And I don't know why I'm struggling to explain this book so much. It is a pretty well-known story anyways, but this book was really easy to read for a book of its time. I felt at the time that I read it that I was kind of nervous about that aspect. It was definitely a page turner, and I was sucked in. I was captivated by the writing and how the scenes were described. While I was reading, I would stop and just reread the scenes a few times over just because I would just love how it was described. There's a few descriptions of like the rainy street or I don't even know. I would try to find a quote, but what time is it? Oh, it's 3:11. I have to leave very shortly. Yeah, if I can find some quotes, I'll try to insert them in here. But yeah, such a good book. I actually read this the same time that I read Frankenstein, and I attempted The Tale of Two Cities, and both of those I struggled with the reading process a lot more. So I think that just made this stand out even more as being very readable and just addictive. So it was really great. Other things I loved about this, obviously, is horror. I love the legal issue that starts this whole thing, and I like the setting, the atmosphere, the rainy London streets. So good. The next one is What Men Live by Leo Tolstoy. This was published in 1885. This is a really tiny little thing. It's very heavy on God and faith, which is incredibly different for me. Why I ended up loving this book so much, because I'm really not a religious person, but it ended up being incredible. So one day, a very poor man comes by to the shoemaker's home. The shoemaker gives him some shoes and some stuff and brings him home for dinner and offers him a job. This man goes by the name of Michael. He's quiet. He never talks. He rarely smiles. And then one day he leaves. And this was a really big surprise. And I can't tell you anymore. As I said, I think this is only like 76 pages, for real. Oh, not even that. This edition is 58 pages, And a lot of that, it doesn't even take up the full page. It's decently large handwriting, and there's lots of drawings in it too. So yeah, but I just remember just being so sucked in by this and just feeling this. It just made me so happy, I would say. The next one is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This was published in 1860. This is my very first Charles Dickens novel, and so far it is my favorite. Beyond this, as I said, I've tried The Two Cities, can't get into it. And I've also tried David Copperfield. Oh my God. I don't know how we go from this to David Copperfield, because David Copperfield just bored me to tears. I could not finish it. But anyways, this one was fantastic. It is amazing. And probably that's right. It is one of the most popular ones that he's written. This is about Pip, who was given the opportunity to become a gentleman if he adopted the name of Pip, and some other constraints from his mysterious benefactor. This has a very clever plot, clever characters, and it's all about expectations. I didn't even realize it at first going into this until it all started to kind of tie together. I started seeing this pattern with expectations, and I started tracking it, and all of the times in different ways in which there are expectations that we have towards other people, that people have for us, that we hold for ourselves. And it's just like the spider web. I also loved how Dickens explains every tiny detail. He is so observant, and it just worked so well here. I don't necessarily love that, but he has he uses unique vocabulary to explain these things. So it is like a treat to just see how he uses English, how he uses words to express himself. It's not like, and then we walked out the door and then we put on our shoe. You know what I mean? It's just like, it's so, I can't even explain it. I would have to express it by reading some quotes. Anyways, he is so observant, and it just worked so incredibly well here. I think it's also the way he constructs his sentences, and again, as the way he uses words. The things that I loved about this book is this theme of expectations and how Dickens just had me thinking about it. I was thinking about this book for months after I had finished reading it, and it still comes up today. And I feel like it's one of those books that, like, in some way, it changes the way you see the world, and that's what this book did for me. Also, I think he's upped my standard of what good writing is as well, because I see how you can have very rich descriptions in a story and it be so good. So I think that it's like up to the bar for me in writing style. Also, the intricate plotting and character development. I love the rags to riches theme, and vice versa, riches to rags. Again, that's central around wealth. Also, Pip starts this story out as a child and grows up to be a man. So when he's a child, you see that child's mind. Dickens does such a good job of getting into the child's mind as well. And like when he's a child, he has a very that limited scope or perspective. So again, something else I really love. So yeah, that is Great Expectations. Also, I had a blast annotating this. There are so many notes and highlights. And it's a little hard to see on camera because I did color code to match my book cover. So I used blues, and then in certain situations I use this really bright yellow for extra emphasis, but I wanted it to match. So, okay, I have about 10 minutes and then I have to grab my bag and take off because my son has an appointment. So the next one is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This was published in 1847, and this follows Jane Eyre. And she grew up in her aunt's home, and her aunt is just this horrible, awful, bad person. And then she goes off to a charity school, and then they train her up right so she can go on and become a governess. And so she is hired to be a governess at Thornhill by Mr. Rochester. Of course, she ends up falling in love with this grouchy man, but Mr. Rochester and Thornhill have some deep, dark secrets. This, again, is a quintessential Gothic novel. It takes place in this house, another big, large house, Thornhill Manor, which holds all kinds of secrets and mysteries. Also, talk about slow burn romance, something else I completely love. Grouchy Love interests, gotta love those. And the writing. Above all, above everything else, the writing. It feels like, it doesn't feel like other writing from its time. It feels so modern, but like so beautiful, and I just get lost in it. So amazing. And the last one, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This was published in 1818. Dr. Frankenstein creates a monster that he cannot stand. He is an abomination. His science project failed. So what does he do? He abandons the monster. The monster is highly intelligent. And I feel like because of this, he grows more and more angry for being abandoned. And he realizes people's reaction to him, that he is not like them. There's no one else like him. And he is utterly alone. And this ends up driving him mad. He is feared and hated. And I really love that. I really love this because he was not necessarily made to be a monster, but his isolation, anger, and circumstances make him act the way he looks on the outside. So he becomes violent and seeks revenge against his creator. Victor gets wind of the thing that he created and that he must do something. He must finally take responsibility because he's created this chaos. This book is actually so heartbreaking that was not what I was expecting at all when I read this. I thought it was just going to be like some fun monster horror, and it is just so much more. I actually did watch the movie about Mary Shelley's life and how she always loved horror novels and creating stories. She had scandalized and ruined herself by running away with Percy B. Shelley. She got pregnant, married him, and tragically what happened with the loss of their baby and how this just destroyed her. And I feel like understanding her life and circumstances in her life and how, like, you can so clearly see that within this book. And I could not stop thinking about how this book applies to other things and situations about creation, abortion, abandonment, taking responsibility, and how there's just so many horrible people out there. This book was really difficult for me to read, just getting through the language of this book. So a lot of the time I felt a little bit confused by the writing style, and I will definitely have to reread it. But of course, the overall concepts and big points were clear anyways. This left me with so much to think about afterwards, and it's just a heartbreaking psychological effect this has as the monster comes to terms with himself. Yeah, this is so incredible. But I definitely think that this would benefit from another reread or several to really kind of get through those barriers that I had with just digesting the language from that time. And that wraps up all my favorite classic books. I hope that even though this list is probably pretty basic, I hope that you still enjoyed it. Thank you all so much for watching, and let me know which are your favorite classics. And I'll see you soon. Bye.